Well, China, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to interview and have a chance to get to know you a little better. When we chatted the first time, I always do pre-screens. You and I was like, oh, we're not gonna have any shortage of topics to talk about because we're
No.
both like these self-help junkies and just totally immersed in the
Yeah.
recovery, personal development space. So we have a lot to talk about, not the least of which is we'll talk about your story, but not the least of which is once we sort of have this foundation of sobriety, like what are the sequence of events, and utilizing different types of tools. Maybe you were suggesting maybe it's not a great idea to jump into intensive trauma therapy at 3 days sober. I know it
Yeah.
depends, but we'll get into that. But I like to start with a little game. It's like a little lightning round where we put some resources up front in the episode. So when you first got sober yourself, was there a book that really helped you early on in recovery?
Was there a book that really helped me? I um I would read these kind of like daily reflections and like meditations. And there's one in particular by Melody Beatty,
Oh,
um,
language of letting
I
go.
Language of Letting Go.
I was just looking
Um,
for it. I think it was on my desk a minute ago.
that and I still will read a passage. I think because it was the little affirmation at the end of like what I'm going to work on, or like asking, like the universe, like, please help me with this.
Mm.
There were so many things that just stood out to me. So yeah, I always recommend that. It's like a morning, because that's when my head would be the loudest. When I would
Oh,
wake up, it was like right away, my head would start running about all the things I needed to get done, all the things I've done in the past, just a real inability to be in the moment.
right.
So reading that in the morning helped.
Yeah, that's a great one. I read that one in a group setting. It was like the thing that we read at the beginning of like it was like a support group outside of, any kind of organized program. But
Yeah.
letting go is a huge part of the beginning because you're letting go of your old identity, your old tools like drinking or drugs or whatever, people, food, whatever that no longer serve you, and letting go is really a huge part of the beginning phase.
Totally. Like surrender. I talk about that a lot with my clients because I get a lot of people that come in, haven't been to treatment before. They've gone through detox, and they're in residential, and they're finally starting to like come to groups. And what I hear is, I'm not willing to do this. I won't do this. I won't, it's like, okay, I'll do that, but like, I'm not going to let go of this one. And so the first thing I start out with when I do groups with them is like, if you ask me, what is the recipe in terms of someone getting sober, or what separates the people from that actually get it versus the people who relapse right away, I would say it's surrender. What
Wow,
are you willing to let go of? What are
that's
you willing to
huge.
surrender? And it has to be everything, because I hear a lot of like, and they're reasonable things, like moms being like, I can't do more treatment after 30 days. I have to go home. I have
Yeah,
kids.
yeah,
And I'm like, but you were driving your kids drunk, you know, or you're going to lose your kids. And so the idea that you will then, put something else before your recovery is
right,
insane,
right.
when you'll end up losing it anyway. I got to get back to my job. That's the one most common one I hear. I got to get back to work. And I'm like, yeah. And if you don't do this right, you're going to lose that job. So I get, yes, people need to pay bills, and everyone can't stay in treatment for a long time, even though that's what the data shows is the most effective, right? Like staying in treatment for
Right.
longer than 30 days. 30 days is just scratching the surface. It's not actually enough. 30 days in detox and residential, and then going right back home, and going back to work, and all those stressors and dealing, it's not effective. So it's, the relationship that you're not willing to let go of that you probably need to, or the, the toxic relationships, the addictions, the other addictions
Oh yeah.
to people and things.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
A
there's
lot of
so,
people are addicted to work.
yeah, the transference of addiction in the beginning is really strong.
Yeah.
So having support around the beginning phase. So 30 days, yeah, it's like it's barely enough time to take a breath, right?
Yeah.
That's not even like a full pay cycle,
No,
It's barely
no.
enough time. So I like the idea and like traditional where it's like 90 90, like they recommend like for the first 90 days, it's like really intensive.
Yeah.
And are there continuing outpatient programs after the 30 days that you find helpful?
Yeah. So ideally, perfect world, right? Is that somebody starts, they go through detox, residential, they get out of residential and they immediately enter an outpatient. I don't like the
Right.
idea that people go leave residential on a Friday and have the weekend to chill and hang out and relapse right before they get back to. So I like the idea of like leaving residential and immediately enrolling in, like doing an intake or an assessment at an outpatient.
An outpatient.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then there's different levels of care with outpatient. There is PHP, which is like, it's kind of like going to school. It's like 5 days a week, all day long.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that really immerses you. When you're going from residential, you're like taken out of your environment and you're very isolated. So
Right.
that is like a step down to help you during the week so that you can go to groups and learn. That's like really intensive. And then you eventually can drop to IOP, which is like 3 days a week for 3 hours.
Okay.
So ideally it would look like that.
Right. Yeah.
And now like everyone can't do that, right? Some people have other things, but 3 days a week for 3 hours a day is not a lot.
Yeah. It's not forever, right? You
No.
can get back to your life, but this is a very critical period of time. I have a friend who calls it like the newcomer grind, where it's like you
Yeah.
just really have to be committed in the beginning, if depending on the severity
Yeah.
of your addiction. But yeah, that's really
Yeah.
important.
Because there are some
Um,
people who say like, at 5 o'clock when I got off work, that's when I would go to the liquor store, and they
mhm,
get really squirrely around 5 o'clock. And then
yeah.
there's some people who are like daily drinkers. And so it doesn't matter, like, when we talk about like triggers, they're like, life is a trigger.
Right.
I drink in the morning, I drink at night, I drink when I'm with
Right.
people, I drink alone. Like, so that, identifying a trigger, it's like everything. Um,
Everything.
I heard a guy say one time that for him, the trigger's on the inside.
Oh yeah.
And I
Yeah.
really like that idea because that resonated with me. It's not like these external things necessarily that make me want to check out. It's the way I feel.
Hmm. Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
you don't do that to me. I do that to me.
Right. But it's so confusing in the beginning because I feel like, especially in the beginning, we're sort of raised with this idea that we are at the effect of life, not
Yes.
at the cause. And I find that these kind of 180 paradoxes are so abundant in recovery, right? It's like almost the exact opposite of what my intuition was. Like the solution is the exact opposite to that.
Yeah. It's a weird thing to not trust your own thinking.
In the beginning,
In
yeah.
the
Oh, yeah.
beginning, such a weird concept. I was like, well, I don't understand. So all the things I've done in the past, like I have to just completely erase that and um, let somebody else run my life that I just met.
It
I don't
sounds
know.
so crazy,
It's
right?
so crazy. Like,
Yeah.
it felt like people were trying to like brainwash me. And then I had people be like, your brain needs washing. And I'm like,
I was just gonna say that.
yeah,
I was dating this guy when I first got sober, but just before I met my husband. And he told me, he goes, I think those people are brainwashing you. And I was like, yeah, my brain needs some washing.
yeah.
That's totally acceptable to me.
I had to accept the fact that in control of my own life, in the driver's seat, crash every time,
Every time.
every time. And it happens I get in I would hold on to these like couple times that I drank normally.
Yeah.
and be like, I think I could do it. But then when I really look at the facts, it's like majority, like 90% of the time when I went to go have one, all bets were off. I lost control. So
I
people were
had
like,
this. Oh, go
yeah.
ahead. Sorry. Go ahead. Finish what
So
you're
people
saying.
were like, okay, you don't have to get in the back seat, but like get in the passenger seat for a second. Can you just like get your hands off the wheel and just trust somebody else? And that's a
Yeah,
big ask.
that's a big ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say I had a friend who used to say that he didn't go to jail every time he drank, but every time he went to jail, he had been drinking.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Yeah.
And it's insane. I talk to a lot of people about, this idea of like an allergy.
Uh-huh.
And people with peanut allergies, say you end up in the hospital because you had peanuts and you realize, oh, I can't have peanuts. You don't rush out of the hospital and find a way to eat peanuts again. Like
That
you
would be
must,
insanity.
yeah, it's the insanity. That's the kind of like mental illness of
Yeah.
addiction, is that it would be like getting out of the hospital after you almost died from eating peanut
Mhm.
butter and being like, the crunchy was the problem. I'm going to have the smooth this time. And like, it's not going to get me. It's just insane.
Yeah, it
It's
really is.
insane. But a lot
Yeah.
of people think that addiction is just getting it out of your system and not doing it. They think that it's just okay, so
It's
I won't put it in my body. And that thinking leads them to believe that they'll go to detox, get it
and
out
then
of their
everything will be
system,
okay.
and it'll be just fine.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
It's just a symptom of a deeper problem, as they say.
Yes.
Yeah. That was I led you down the path of I led you astray a bit. I just have a couple more questions to ask you before I ask you about your story. I did want to ask you about your daily self-care routine, or even if it's like, even if you look at it like on a weekly basis, some of us like do annual retreats or semi-annual retreats. What does self-care look like to you these days?
Self-care. It's changed a little since having a child.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you have a little 15-month-old boy.
I
So
do.
sweet. Yeah, early
Yeah.
motherhood is rough when it comes to.
It
So
is. And sometimes, it's not what it used to feel like. It was like, oh, I'm going to like get out of town for the weekend. Sometimes it was like, I'm going to do some meditation, or I'm going to go get a massage, or I'm going to unplug or go hiking. Nowadays, it looks like I am going to like ask for help
oh, that's a big one.
and allow someone to come help me, which is still, really, really challenging for me, because
Mhm.
I think that I need to do it all on my own. And we learn
Yeah.
that when we get sober, but it's something that with motherhood, I've had to like relearn, like I cannot do it all. I need to ask for help. And so yeah, like the other day I had my friend's mom, who's like been like a mom to me. She came over for an hour and a half and I went and got my nails done, and
Yay.
like that felt really good, just to get out of the house and
Yeah.
just let someone take over. And sometimes it looks like a bath, and sometimes it looks like calling a friend, and sometimes it looks like going to therapy. Um, and I would say therapy has been the most useful tool for me in terms of like making sense of things and
Yeah.
talking to somebody else who gets it, who knows me, who I've been working with for a very long time, and like knows my stuff and knows when I am drowning. My therapist
Mhm.
said to me the other day, which was so useful. She said, I was talking about motherhood and working and just this load of how it feels like I'm drowning.
Mhm.
And she said, what you're doing in terms of like all on your own and not getting enough help is you're currently drowning. And first we have to find a way to get you help so that you're not drowning anymore, because I can't provide you solutions to how to stay underwater. Right? Like it's not going to be useful for me to be like, hey, you're drowning, you're underwater.
Yeah.
Let's find a coping skill while you're underwater.
Right.
It's like you
Yeah.
need air. You need to get to the surface. So let's talk
Yeah.
about how to get you to the surface. And I really appreciate, her honesty with me, which is like, I can't help you continue to be underwater.
That is such what a compassionate way to frame that too.
Yeah.
Were you not even recognizing you were underwater?
My underwater and my fiance's underwater look very differently.
Hmm.
And so I was recognizing his overwhelm, but
Hmm.
my overwhelm comes out more like anxiety rather than like
Okay.
irritability or agitation. So his is more outward and mine's more inward. And so I
Mm.
was not, um, that week, I was not recognizing, it seemed like he was the problem.
Funny how that always seems to be the
Yeah.
case.
And, so what she kind of helped me see was that our tanks, in terms of like our reserve tanks of what we have
Hmm.
left, our energy levels, like are very different. So I was
Yeah.
doing that thing that I hear, a lot of parents talk about where it's like, you did this and I did this and like, tit for tat and like what you're responsible for, what I'm responsible for. And it's like, no, we were both underwater at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brene Brown, like I recently saw a clip where she talked about like 50-50 and that concept and how silly that is. That it's
Yeah.
sometimes I'm doing 80% and
Yeah.
sometimes I'm doing 20, and like that, like give and take of not constantly expecting it to be equal all the time.
Right. Yeah. It was so funny as you were talking about that. I thought about Brene. We must have seen the same clip because she was
Yeah.
talking about how they come together at the end of the day and she's like, I got 20. And he'll be
Yeah.
like, I got you. I got the 80. And there are some days when they both are like at 20 and then they sit down and discuss a plan. I was like, wow, that is really unique.
Yeah.
And it sounds super practical.
It makes a lot of sense. In her new book, I think Heart, Atlas of
Atlas
the
of the
Heart,
Heart.
she talks about, working in kitchens and how this, I haven't worked in restaurants, but apparently there's a thing when you're like overwhelmed and you say like,
Oh,
I'm done, like I can't, I need, and somebody's like, all right, go take 5, I'll cover your tables. And like you go outside and you take a deep breath and then you come back so that you can actually be effective.
yeah.
And like letting everyone know, like I'm at that point, I have nothing left. Like
Right. Yeah.
help me step in. And that's been really kind of useful. I remember reading that chapter and then going home and being like, okay, I need to tell him when I have
Right.
nothing left so that he
Yeah.
can step in so that I can go get my tank filled up again.
Yeah. Man, that just makes me feel like breathing a sigh of relief. It's like, gosh, we just needed like a little bit of framework and some language around, how to practice emotion management basically in a relationship with a child, because that is a whole level of complexity that we're never taught how to handle.
No,
Yeah,
no. And so
that's really
much,
good.
you're kind of taught when you get sober how to regulate and how to take care of yourself.
Yourself.
And then, and then sometimes you go in and out of remembering that. And then sometimes you
Uh-huh.
forget and you screw up and you lash out or
Act
make
human.
mistakes. And then, yes. And then you have to, apologize. I learned that in sobriety that, if I feel like I made a mistake to immediately like clean it up so that I don't
Right.
have to
Yeah.
go to bed just beating myself up because I'm prone to that, that morbid reflection of just sitting around
Mhm.
thinking of all the things I have done and the ways that I didn't do things right. My therapist calls it perfectionism.
Yeah. That
That's like
ruminating. Oh, it's
ruminating on,
terrible.
yeah. And so I've learned to like, think about my day. I love that 10th step exercise of kind of like looking through my day
Right.
and in
Yeah.
a structured way of like, where have I caused harm? Like, was I dishonest about anything? Rather than just allowing my head to run with anything that pops in. And,
Yeah.
the idea of like not taking action on my thoughts,
Oh, yeah.
that I can have thoughts and that I can like realize that they're not always sane and they're
Right.
not always coming from an honest place.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's something I learned in sobriety, which was really, really helpful
Yeah.
to let my thoughts kind of go and not take action on them.
How do you feel about that part of the 10 step that is talking about recognizing assets as well?
I think it's really important, especially for people that have that kind of like perfectionistic, negative self-talk
Mhm.
of Hold on one second. Sorry, there's a siren.
Oh, that's okay. It doesn't come across.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love, there's a certain part of the 4-step that talks about taking inventory and
Mhm.
how there's certain, it's kind of like being in a grocery store and like taking stock, and there's certain things on the shelf that are still good. There's certain
Right.
things that like that, hey,
Yeah.
that's worked, that's still working, let's keep that.
Yeah.
It's not expired.
Yeah.
And then there are other things that are no longer serving me that
Right.
needed to be taken out and thrown out
Yeah.
and
Definitely.
replaced.
Yeah. And yeah, the sufficient substitute. I really appreciate that part of it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we take a little step back and kind of talk about how we got here, in as much or as little detail as you want to share? I think it's so important to, family of origin, childhood experiences sort of set the stage for, that's where we develop our beliefs about ourselves and the world. And I think it's so interesting, some of the childhood dynamics that we develop survival skills for, that don't necessarily translate to healthy adulthood. So I'm just curious, like, what did that look like for you?
So I was just talking actually about this in a group yesterday about like the parentified child.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and I really relate to that, from a young age. People were like, she's so mature. I remember my friends, my mom's like best friend who I grew up with, who was like a mom to me. She told me this story the other day that like my mom was saying something to me, and I think I might have been like about 5. And I said to her, like, who's the parent here? Like, like that level of
Oh,
just awareness that I was put in this role that as a kid, people treated me like an adult.
right.
And I appreciate that in that I wasn't at the kids' table. I always, when I went out to dinner with my family, like we were always, at the table with the adults. But the downside to that is that, and I actually think it's kind of what like grew me into being a therapist, is that I was always very hyper vigilant about everyone else's experience and making
Mm,
sure everyone else was okay.
wow.
Uh,
Why did you feel like they were not okay?
you know, my mom had definitely some struggles, kind
Hmm.
of like emotionally. She grew up in a really difficult household. Both of her parents were alcoholics, and there was a lot of
Okay.
abuse in the home. And so there was a lack of safety, which
Right.
then created this fear for her of
Mm.
abandonment, stuff we usually see, with people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. So
Mm.
emotional regulation was not her strong suit. So she
Okay.
would get really emotional, and I always wanted to step in and take care of her,
Oh,
and
yeah.
soothe her. And
Okay.
so, as I grew up, um, when I was about 10 years old, my parents got divorced.
That's hard.
And
That's hard on kids too.
it was hard, and they had been fighting, and so there was part of me that was like that they would be better off not
Okay.
together.
Hmm.
And then they asked us a question of like who we want to live with, which I don't know if that was like the best thing at the time, but I chose my mom and my sister chose our father. And so there was a time in which like my sister and my dad moved out of the house and I was just with my mom. And our family was kind of divided. I was an ice skater. My mom would take me to ice skating practice and competitions. And my sister was a tennis player. My dad loved tennis. So he would take her and my mom would take me. So it did feel like we had these like teams.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
my mom she wasn't really big on like education or like you have to do anything. Like she was kind of a kid herself. And so she would like take me to Disneyland
On a
multiple
school
times a
day.
week. Yeah, on a school day, and like it was amazing. We had so much fun. We didn't have any rules. I could do
Was your
whatever I
sister jealous? She wouldn't take your sister out of school?
My sister had a complicated relationship with my mom, so I think she was just like happy we have my dad to herself.
Okay. Yeah.
And so then my mom, with the divorce and really not knowing how to like function without my dad kind of handled everything for her. She kind of lost it. And so she decided to move. I don't know if it was like an impulsive decision, but I was staying with my dad because she was out of the country. And like one day she said, you got to move in with your dad and your sister. I'm not coming home.
It was that abrupt.
I was about probably 10 years old when that happened.
Okay.
And so, yeah, there was a lot of abandonment,
For sure.
and deep, deep wounds that I didn't really know how to make sense of. And my dad put me into therapy right
Wow.
away. My dad
Was
really
that helpful?
therapy. It was super helpful. The first therapist I saw was like a child therapist that clearly didn't know my level of maturity. And she was like playing Candyland with me and was like, what do you feel about when you move the piece? And I was like, this lady is a quack and I'm not going to see her. And then I found this other woman, Orly, and my dad's therapist was upstairs and she was below. And so we would sometimes have like joint sessions where
nice.
therapists would come downstairs and we would have a joint session. And I gained a relationship that I never had with my father through therapy. And I sometimes used it as a manipulation tool, where I was like, I don't have a mom, I need that puppy, and let's go talk about it in therapy. And then I got the puppy and I promised I would take care of it. And so I learned amazing things. I also, which then I used in my addiction, learned it as a way to manipulate. And, my therapist helped me like through high school, through middle school. I had a person to bounce things off, like a parent of how do I make sense of this? And I like this boy and he doesn't like me, or this girl's being mean to me, or I'm having problems with my body and I don't feel comfortable in my own skin. And like being able to verbalize that with somebody like was really present and listened and loved me. So it was I don't think a lot of people get that experience, and I'm very grateful for it. And I think it really helped me not lose my mind with my mom's absence.
Yeah.
And my dad really stepped up too.
It's like, you were given such a gift with all those tools and all that support, yet it didn't prevent you from going down the road.
No.
I mean, I say this in terms of like, I grew up in the church and I had the love of God. I was taught the love of God, lots of judgment too, but that's another story.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that these things don't necessarily like save us from needing to go through whatever experience that we went through. So can you kind of walk me through like when you started drinking or using and kind of when you crossed the line?
Yeah. So through high school, I wasn't like I wasn't really into there's one experience I had when I was 16 where I went to I think it was like Beverly Hills, like after party. And I got in a limo and they had already had prom, and everyone was drinking and I had to catch up. And so there was it was a limo and there was like a thing of vodka. And I remember like chugging, and then I woke up in the hospital. And I don't know what, my dad was there, and I remember the nurse thought that it was like a suicide attempt because of how intoxicated I was. I think like my level was like 0.33. My BAC. And so they were like, that's insane for like a 16-year-old to have that like blood alcohol percentage. And so I remember them being like, why did you do this? And, my response was my mom. And so I had this resentment and this pain. And that was the, how they kind of talk about, like, the big book talks about, it was an ominous warning.
Yeah.
That was like the beginning of like, she's going to have a problem with it. It didn't turn into like daily drinking there, but it was like, I remember having a therapy session with my dad because he like found my, friends called him. Thank God somebody from my high school like came to the party. I was like apparently passed out. And then I was turning blue, and they called my dad, and he came and picked me up and brought me to the emergency room. And I remember him like talking about holding my like lifeless body like in his hands and feeling like he was going to lose me. And I was like, how terrified he was. And I remember just being like, leave me alone. I had no ability to like connect with like the danger of what I did or how it affected him. I was so kind of self-centered and, a teenager, and just being like, I'm fine. It was a mistake. It won't happen again. Leave me alone. And then, high school, I graduated, I went to college. I got into a relationship right before I got into college. I went to go visit my dad. My dad was shooting a movie. He was a producer. He was shooting a movie in Canada. So I visited him. I fell in love while I was there. And then I immediately started college in this new relationship. And so I couldn't be present with anything that was going on at school. Like
Where were you going to school?
I was going to school at a place called Wheaton. It was in Massachusetts. There's two of them. There's a like religious one in Illinois. I accidentally printed out the application. Like when I went to go to the school, like I was touring it. I was filling out this application. It said something about like, are you willing to something with Jesus Christ? And I remember my dad's a Jew, and he was reading this and he was like, what? And I was like, I don't think so. And then I realized there's two Wheatons. So Wheaton College was just a small, like liberal arts progressive.
It was, and your dad was in California, and you were?
My dad was still shooting in Canada.
Oh, he was in Canada.
And so he took me to college and kind of left me there. And then my boyfriend at the time would come visit me in Massachusetts, and we would go into Boston. And so I never really developed like relationships at school. And I was, it was impossible to get alcohol there because it was a tiny town, and there was one liquor store and a tanning salon, and they knew that all the underage kids went there. So it was impossible. I tried to like, bribe a senior to buy me alcohol, and like, it just was impossible. And so they had weed, which I can't, I am not a weed smoker. People feel calm with it. I go into like psychosis. I see things, I call the cops on myself. Like I think there's a genetic aspect. My dad was couldn't handle weed.
Couldn't handle it either.
Tell me times he would just get paranoid and like anxious and freak out. And so I tried smoking weed a couple times there. And I remember the trees were talking to me, kind of like Alice in Wonderland, like telling me to go different ways. And I was like, So I didn't drink a lot while I was there, but I did kind of fake a suicide attempt so that I could get home. And that was part of like, manipulation that I learned of like, okay, how do I get myself back to LA? Because my boyfriend was going back to LA, and I was like, I cannot be without him. And so I went to the college counselor, and I said, I'm having thoughts, and like, a lot of manipulation. And that's where, my therapist manipulation kind of like really my disease, my addiction really fed into that. So I ended up, my dad sent me home because he let me come home because he was terrified that I was going to hurt myself.
Right. Yeah.
And I transferred to Loyola Marymount. And it was very different from any other school I've been to. And my drinking got worse there. I also went to a doctor to get a prescription of Adderall because I was blacking out a lot, and I was not focusing, and I couldn't, I was not getting my work done, and I was on academic probation at Loyola. And so I was like, I need something to catch up and like, study. And then that kind of started another addiction where I was, prescribed a certain amount. And then I started taking more and more and more, and became really, really addicted to it. It also helped me drink more and stay awake.
Right. Yeah. It's a
Um,
very common experience.
yeah, yeah. I was obsessively cleaning and organizing and color coordinating and would still not get my work done.
You're right, right, right. Yeah.
Um,
I remember those days. Yeah. Very.
mhm.
When did you decide, did you have like a turning point where you were just like, I have to get sober now?
A lot of things happened. That relationship became really toxic and ended. And my best friend from high school overdosed and passed away.
Oh
And
my God.
I was 90 pounds and my hair was falling out. And I was like, my skin was yellow. And, just, I was not eating. Parliament Lights was my, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I was really, really sick. And just really like kind of my drinking took a turn of like suicidal drinking. Like I didn't care what happened to me. I was driving intoxicated. I lived up on Mulholland Drive, which is a very dangerous
I do,
place to be drinking and driving. And I gave up on life. And my sister was sober at the time, when she has 3 years ahead of me in sobriety and
Oh,
age.
nice.
And so I knew that she got sober. I saw that she had changed. I saw something in her eyes. I saw something in her behavior. I thought she joined a cult. Um, but I was interested because I was like, something's happened to her and she's
Mm.
not who she used to be. Um, and so I always noted that. And she never pushed me to, go to a meeting with her, or she never, scolded me about my drinking, even though I made a mess. Like she had a sober karaoke birthday and I was drunk and just, it was at a karaoke bar, and I was apparently eating dumplings and then projectile vomited the dumplings all over the walls. And she never
Super
scolded me
fun.
about my drinking.
Wow.
And so when I finally, January 1st, 2008, it was just it wasn't a crazy night. Nothing like super out of the ordinary happened. I was trying to control and enjoy my drinking, and I was only going to have champagne. And I blacked out again, and my best friend wouldn't talk to me, and I didn't know why or what I had done again. And I called my sister and I said, I want to come to one of those meetings with you. I need help. And
Oh,
that's
that's
started
amazing.
my journey.
That's
So
amazing.
her and I had this, she kind of like showed me the ropes and like told me the things to do and not do. And my dad took us
Right.
on a vacation to Cabo when I had like a couple months sober, and we would read literature together, and like we couldn't get to a meeting. So we would sit and she would talk. She's like, we're going to do a meeting because the meeting's more than one person. So we're going to have a meeting,
Nice.
and like walked me through it.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
brilliant. And so did you join the program, as we say, and did the whole thing?
Yeah. I worked the 12 steps. I had a really hard time with the 4-step in
Mhm.
that, I had a lot of anger towards my mom. And
Yeah.
I remember calling my mentor and being like, what is my part in my mom leaving when I was a kid? And he told me to look at like how long ago that happened. And I said,
Mhm.
well, I was 10 and I was 21 at the time when I got sober. And he said, how long have you been using that anger towards her to kill yourself?
Oh,
How
rude.
long have you been drinking at her? Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
so
Because
good.
I had been seeing therapists who had really kind of like co-signed that everything wrong with me was her
Yeah.
fault. And now I have somebody saying, I can't use that anymore, that I am not a victim. And, I remember my mentor saying, victims don't get sober. And I was like, but something happened to me.
Yeah.
And, my mentor sponsor, really helped me look at um, my mom as a person, and not what
Mhm.
she had done to me, but like what
Right.
she was struggling with.
Yeah.
So I developed a lot of compassion. I ended up making an amends to her.
Wow.
And our relationship changed because I stopped blaming her for everything in my life.
Yeah. That is amazing. I mean, I was joking around when I said that was rude. I feel
Yeah,
like the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off, you know?
totally.
And
Totally.
there's something, I do believe that there is a appropriate place to validate pain before we move off of it. But there is something so interesting about how sometimes therapy can be co-signing in that way. And just the stark reality of a different context and perspective of how are you using your story to destroy yourself, like how your story is destroying you,
Yeah.
and putting it into that context is so empowering.
Yeah.
Right. And so
Even, yeah.
as a 10-year-old, you are not responsible for your mom leaving you, but where you can take responsibility is like, it is in the sense that you are taking your power back.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
And I
magical.
was in some way learning how to reparent myself
Uh-huh.
rather than
Yeah.
looking at all the things I didn't get. It's like, well, I am a 21-year-old now. How
Wow.
can I take care of myself?
Oh, that's everything. That's the foundation.
Yeah.
Let me ask you something. I want to be mindful of your time, but I do want to sort of touch on, and thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like so many people are going to identify with those feelings, right? Like there's a lot of us who had maybe not so great relationships with our mom, but it sounds like I had that experience where my relationship with my parents, both of them transformed in sobriety. So I feel like that gives so much hope to people. But in the beginning, you and I know that there's all kinds of tools available. And I think you brought up such a good point when we were chatting before about, the sequence of, of using healing modalities, like the right tool at the right time. Can you just share your reflections on how you think about that?
Yeah. So, I have a lot of clients who come um, into, detox and residential and say, I drink because of my trauma.
Right.
So if I work on my trauma, then I'll stop drinking.
In
Right?
theory.
In theory. And what we talk about is that, yeah, the drinking, the drug use is not, it's the ineffective solution to deal
Right.
with the way that we feel.
Yeah.
And so that's not, if drinking was the problem, we just put down the drinking, we'd be fine, right? Like that's not the problem. The problem is that I don't know how to cope. I don't know how to self-soothe. I just watched my son when he's got his bottle at night and it just like, yeah, and how it soothes him. And I'm like, yeah, I get that. Like alcohol did that for me. That
Different
like
kind of bottle.
euphoric, like this is like I can finally take a deep breath.
Yeah.
So
Relief.
the problem is that I can't take a deep breath without going to alcohol. So learning how to be okay in my own skin, which takes time. It takes time to walk into a room and not think that everyone's talking about you or not think that everything's about you, right? I
No,
remember
it is
that.
so funny.
Yeah, I remember hearing a woman share that like her selfishness looked like she was the piece of crap that the world revolved around. And I was like, I relate to that because I heard all these people talking about selfishness. I only care about myself. And I was like, no, I care about everyone else so deeply. I wish I didn't care about everyone else. And then I realized like me thinking about what everyone's thinking about me is selfishness. I have this
Right.
incredible self-centeredness where even if I'm talking negatively to myself and don't think very highly of myself, it's still thinking about me. Right. So like learning how to get out of myself. The tools that I used when I was newly sober were these like elementary things that really worked. Like I would get out of myself, especially when I heard that negative loop start.
Mm-hmm.
It was like alarms went off and I learned, oh, time to evacuate. Get out of your head. And so I would like call other people and ask them how they're doing, even though it was really uncomfortable, especially to call like
Yeah.
strangers and be like,
I
hi, I met
know.
you the other night. And like, I want to see how you're doing. Or like, journaling. Like I would write down what was in here, and it would make more sense when it was on paper.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
would be able to like, and not necessarily just dump that on somebody else, but like look at what was going on in my head. Just that kind of like free association writing. I would, I'm trying to think of the tools when I would go drive to the ocean and I would sit there because I had a really hard time with like the God thing. Because I was raised with, my dad was Jewish, but we were atheists growing up. And not religious at all. And so the God thing, I was like, I don't get that. But people talked about nature and that like a higher power could be the ocean. So I would like go drive to the ocean. I would just sit there. I wanted to do retreats when I was newly sober. I was entering a master's program for psychology, and they offered this Buddhist retreat that was a silent retreat. And I was like, perfect, I should do that. And I called my mentor and he was like, for 7 days, you in your own head? Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
That is the word. Only you listening to you. That's a terrible idea.
Bad idea.
Yeah. So I'm glad I took that advice because now I would love that. Now that seems like a great thing. But when I was newly sober, I needed to get out of my head.
And that's a perfect example of the right tool at the right time.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's a great tool, but not in the beginning.
No. Sometimes it was like, when I was really dysregulated and feeling like I could not get out of my head, I would like go take a cold shower.
Oh, that's a big one. Cold therapy, cold exposure.
Yeah.
Man, people
right now, everyone's cold plunging. The thing everyone to do, apparently.
Yeah.
But yeah, that really helped. Honestly, the best thing was talking to people who got it, who understood, and who would tell me, I felt like you felt, and it will get better. I promise you, just keep hanging in there. Because I had a mentor who told me that she called me a sidestepper. She said that every time the hard work comes in front of me, I sidestep.
Well, who doesn't do that?
Right? Yeah. I was like, I don't want to deal with that. The problem is that if I don't do that work, it just keeps coming around.
I know. Yeah.
It just keeps coming back and just in different forms, but it's the same work. It's like, you don't like conflict? Here you go. Time to address conflict. And I'm like, nah, not right now. Later. I'll deal with that.
Later is
that
good.
lesson later. Yeah. And so now I've learned, I feel fear. I feel it in my body. I feel, I hear my thoughts and I go, okay, I'll do it anyway.
Right.
In fact, I'll do it right now when I'm like, I don't want to make that phone call, or I don't want to send that letter. Or I don't want to open my bills. Like, I'll do it now, because if I wait till later, it won't happen.
Right. Yeah. I feel like the whole concept of taking contrary action was so beneficial to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Doing what I don't want to do and then not do the thing that I wanted
to do.
Yeah.
Delayed gratification. I want to feel good now. Right? It's kind of like a time release pill. I was like, I don't want a time release pill. I want it all right now.
Yeah.
And with our Amazon society, and it's like, I can get anything I want right now. I don't even have to pay for shipping. I don't have to wait even 3 days. I can get it tomorrow. Like, that impulsivity was really hard for me when I was new and sober, to not want to just pick up a drink.
Yeah. Amazing how things change over time, because look at you now.
Yeah. It's crazy. I never wanted 15 years sober. I never thought, I literally thought, I'll stay sober for a year and then I'll grow out of it. I'll get, because I thought that it wasn't like alcoholism. I thought that I was in some messed up relationships, and I'll get my life together and then I can drink normally. And I remember reading stuff about like the, greatest obsession of every like alcoholic is that one day they'll be normal with it. And I was like, oh shoot. Like I knew that I deeply knew that I wasn't going to be able to. I knew that like I had process line. And I heard a guy say that genetics loads your gun and that your experiences pull the trigger.
Ooh, that's
Your environment
good.
pulls the trigger. And so I
Yeah.
knew, because of my mom's side of addiction, I knew that my gun was loaded. And then all these things happened to me when I was younger and my trigger was pulled. And I knew that once that had happened, like I wasn't going to be normal with drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
And I realized I could be happy without it.
Well, there it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. There it is.
But it
That's
took a lot
beautiful.
of work to get there,
Yeah, it does.
to actually feel that sense of joy and like be with other people who are in it too, and feel
Yeah.
that, like, get that first belly laugh where you're like,
Oh, yeah.
I'm enjoying life. Like, this is fun.
Yeah. I think that's what's missed in the beginning is the realization that it's going to be fun, so
Yeah.
much fun without all the negative consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Especially with
amazing.
COVID, I watched some of my clients struggle so much with
Oh, yeah.
the way that things were when I got sober. It was like you had a tribe and
Yeah.
you were out doing things and going places. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so many of my clients, struggled with either being sober before and relapsing during COVID because of that
Mhm.
lack of connection and the lack
Yeah.
of around people and isolation. So many people I know are like, I was not drinking until I started working from home, and then I started drinking all day.
Yeah. Yeah. That
Um,
really triggered a lot of people.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that we have so many tools available to us now. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing. I mean, you're on the front lines and that can be a tough place to be, but thankfully, I mean, you obviously have good coping skills. So that's magical. Um, if people want to learn more about you or the work that you do, what's a good place for people to reach out to you?
So I work for Clear Recovery,
Mhm.
and you guys can go on the website, or
Okay.
and my email is China Bresner at clearrecovery.com. So if anyone has questions or anything, you can always reach out to me.
That's amazing. Well, yeah, I looked at the website. There's lots of resources available there too. So if somebody listening is just looking for a place to start and needing some additional support, I think this is a great place to start.
Yeah, we have
So
a mental health track as well, and then a virtual track, so that there are some people who, are in California and can't, because of their circumstances, can't go to a facility. And
mhm,
so, like, that's been a really cool addition. Doesn't work so much with the dual diagnosis, right? Because, like, we really,
right.
like, there's certain accountability pieces of going through treatment, and dealing with addiction, that in person is really important. But for the
Yeah.
mental health track, it's been really cool to have people that normally couldn't go to treatment, because of work or family or transportation, be able to get the services they need from their own home.
Yeah. That's so
Yeah.
important. I feel like that was the blessing of COVID is opened up a lot more resources.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was such a
So
pleasure to be able
much.
to spend some time with you today and hear your
Yeah.
story. And
Thanks for
yeah,
having me. This has been wonderful.
thank you so much. We'll talk again real soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks.